Hey guys, tonight we're stepping barefoot into the misty green of ancient Indonesia, where the jungle hums with secrets and the birds know more than they should. You're not holding a phone. There's no signal towers, no satellite dishes, just you and a pigeon with a tiny scroll strapped to its leg. The leaves shimmer with dew. A light breeze stirs the vines above. Somewhere nearby, a crested dove lets out a soft trill, and if you listen carefully, you'll notice it isn't random. Not quite. That coo might just be the sound of a message passing overhead, one you weren't meant to hear. And don't get too cozy yet, because if this bird gets spooked, crashes, or gets eaten by a fruit bat, the message it carries could be lost. And so could you. It's a system that works only because it must. Because in a world without paper routes or postal codes, your safety may depend on a well-trained bird with a good sense of direction and nerves of steel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I love seeing how far this cozy little corner of history can reach. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up on a raised bamboo mat still sticky with sleep. Outside, the forest breathes. Thick roots clutch the soil like fingers, and above them, branches weave a ceiling alive with birdsong. The people here believe that each tone carries a meaning, warnings, greetings, invitations, even gossip, all wrapped in chirps and flutters. Historians still argue whether ancient Indonesians first domesticated pigeons, doves, or another now extinct jungle flyer. What we know is this birds mattered, not for eggs or meat, but for what they could carry across miles of thick canopy words. Ideas, warnings, a peace offering, a declaration of war. You wander toward a clearing where elders squat in a circle, smoke from smoldering coconut husks curling around them. In the center, a cage made of woven rattan contains 5 birds, each twitching gently. One elder reaches inside and removes a slender creature with sleek green-gray feathers and a single loop of twine around its ankle. He speaks to it. Yes, speaks. Not baby talk, but a deliberate phrase in a local dialect, low rhythmic, more chant than sentence. He presses a folded strip of palm bark against the bird's chest. It's been dried and cut with sharpened fishbone inked with what looks like burned banana skin. You can barely make out the grooves. He wraps it, carefully ties it with a strip of sugarcane fiber, and loops it onto the twine. The bird doesn't resist. It's waiting. With a sharp whistle, the elder releases it, and it vanishes upward like an arrow. A heartbeat later, the forest swallows it. You wonder how many birds have done this, how many kingdoms survived because of a few ounces of feathers and instinct. The wind picks up. A child nearby giggles and points upward. You look. Another bird circles back, coasting down toward the clearing with something strapped to its leg. This wasn't a novelty. It was infrastructure. One mainstream theory suggests these practices started as early as 2000 BCE, alongside trade routes that eventually evolved into the famed maritime Silk Road. Islands as far-flung as Sumatra, Java, Sulawesi, and even Timor may have once been linked not just by boats, but by beaks. But then there are the fringe beliefs that shamans first taught birds to read energy trails and could send thoughts, not words, by tying sacred herbs to the birds' legs. That these birds didn't just fly messages. They carried pieces of the sender's spirit. Maybe far-fetched, maybe not. The air thickens with the scent of burning tamarind wood. Another elder begins to hum, rhythmic and slow, like the turning of a wheel. It's a lullaby. But it's not for a baby, it's for a bird. Nestled in a small cage nearby, a young hatchling tilts its head, listening, imprinting. Later, you'll learn that every village had its own flight rhythm. Birds were trained to follow drum beats, wine chimes, and even the smell of fermented rice left out in small bowls on rooftops. Birdsong becomes signal. Wings become wires. You glance up again. Somewhere out there, a bird you'll never see is cutting across the horizon carrying a note that could save a life or doom a dozen. And just like that, the message system of ancient Indonesia doesn't feel primitive. It feels genius. You're standing in the forest, but it feels like you've stepped into the middle of a code book. The trees are tall, yes, but what grabs your attention is the sound. The canopy above pulses with live coos, whistles, chirps, clicks. It's not random, and your ears are starting to tune in. The locals say the birds speak not with human words, but with patterns. A certain trill means snake nearby, a descending warble stranger approaching, and if you hear 3 short bursts followed by silence, well, that's not good. It means someone's been injured. This is not superstition. It's survival. These communities lived so closely with nature that even the birds became part of the warning system. Some researchers today call it bioacoustic messaging. Others just call it knowing your neighbors. You walk alongside a young boy who barely reaches your shoulder. He's holding a dried seed pod with holes carved in it. As he spins it on a vine, it whistles softly, a sound that mimics the alert call of a hill mynah. It's part toy, part training tool. Behind him, a bird echoes the call back. This isn't a coincidence, it's rehearsed. Historians still argue whether these birds were truly trained in the Western sense, or if ancient Indonesians merely selected from naturally responsive flocks, domesticating not individual birds, but behavior itself. Either way, it worked. And it wasn't limited to the royal courts or city hubs. Even tiny villages used this system. Think of it as jungle Wi-Fi. Everyone was connected so long as you listened. You sit on a large stone, half covered in moss. Around you, children are releasing practice birds from baskets, each tied with colored thread. Blue flies north red to the east. Green well green is supposed to circle back. You watch one disappear, and the trainer beside you sighs. He'll be back, she says, not entirely convinced. The fringe theories are, as always, wilder. One tradition from Borneo claims that certain birds were taught to mimic messages not by voice, but by flight path. A trained bird would swoop in a spiral to signal good news or zigzag if danger was near. The idea, if someone was watching the sky, they could read the news before the bird even landed. You're skeptical, but then again, you're not the one who spent years watching feathers blur against jungle mist. There's a story they tell in the celebs about a man who fell from a cliff and was found days later because his pet mynah kept circling overhead, calling in a tone no one had heard before. The bird never left his side. Eventually, the villagers followed its cries and found the man alive, if slightly bruised. The bird, it retired, lived the rest of its days being hand-fed dried mangoes. But not all birds were beloved pets. Some were tools. Others were scouts, and a few were borderline celebrities. In Java, a legend persists of a bird named Layang Putih White Flyer. It was said to be the fastest courier in the Western archipelago, able to cross mountains in less than a day. How, no one agrees. Some say it was part hawk. Others say it was trained with incense trails laid from village to village. And here's where the debates get lively. One group of historians claims these incense trails were purely symbolic. Another swears they were real burned in specific patterns to lure birds toward their destinations. Scent mapping, they call it, like ancient GPS, but with cinnamon and clove. You walk past a grove where an elder is gently rubbing a bird's wings with crushed turmeric. For strength, she says, smiling with one tooth. The bird doesn't flinch. It's done this before. There's a logic to it all, a rhythm, a kind of quiet intelligence that no one wrote down, but everyone seemed to understand. And as you look up again through the fluttering leaves and tangled vines, you catch a glimpse of a bird mid-flight veering slightly west. A tiny scroll bobs at its leg, and for a second it's not just a bird. It's a lifeline, a carrier of secrets, a whisper in motion. You follow the path uphill where the jungle thins and the air turns crisp. The earth here is damp and dark, padded with leaves. As you reach a flattened ridge, a faint tapping sound guides you soft and steady like a heartbeat. Tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap, tap. You arrive at what looks like a humble compound, a ring of bamboo huts, each crowned with thatched palm. There are no walls, no guards, but the energy here is precise, almost rehearsed. You've stepped into a flight school, the original kind. Not for aircraft, for birds. Dozens of them sit in elevated cages built from split bamboo and palm sinew aligned like musical notes on a staff. Each cage is paired with a person, an elder, a teen, sometimes even a small child stroking feathers, whispering words or tying string to a small carved token. You kneel beside an elderly man with paper-thin skin and a spine curved like a bow. His bird, a compact creature with dusty brown feathers and iridescent blue eyes, perches calmly on his hand. It's wearing what looks like a tiny ankle bracelet made from plaited banana fiber. The old man holds out a strip of palm bark etched with jagged lines and places it into your palm. It's the size of a chewing gum wrapper, yet detailed like a map. These aren't random scratches. It's a message, and this bird is about to deliver it. He attaches the scroll to the bird's leg with practiced care loop, twist, tuck. Then he makes a clicking sound with his tongue, and the bird takes off wings, slapping the air, rising like smoke. Historians still argue whether these flight schools were formal institutions or just evolved organically from everyday training. Some suggest there were designated birdmasters who passed knowledge down only to apprentices. Others think anyone with a cage and some grain could participate. Either way, a few basic principles appear again and again. First, repetition. Each bird is flown along the same path dozens, sometimes hundreds of times. It learns by habit, not just instinct. Second, reward. Some birds were fed only at their destination, ensuring they had a reason to keep returning. Others were enticed with specific scents, burned cloves, dried jackfruit, or in one curious example from eastern Java, smoked eel. Third, memory. Contrary to the myth that birds just know where to go, ancient Indonesians built what scholars call scent anchors and visual markers, distinct objects placed at key locations. A crooked stick, a bit of cloth, a polished shell hung from a branch. Birds would associate these visuals with safety food or rest. It's all remarkably clever and completely silent. No wires, no passwords, just a dance between air instinct and trust. A young girl beside you is coaxing her own bird into motion. She sings softly a melody as old as the forest. The song has no words, just vowel sounds open, round, gentle. The bird twitches, then flaps. She stops singing. The bird stays still. She resumes. It lifts a foot. Coincidence not likely. Fringe historians argue that song played a deeper role in avian memory, that birds weren't just responding to training cues, but to lullabies. These musical patterns repeated daily became part of the flight code oral breadcrumbs, leading from one village to another. The girl finally releases her bird, and it soars like it's been launched from a slingshot banking left just before a banyan tree. She watches until it vanishes. Then she turns to you, shyly proud. It's easy to forget that most of these trainers were farmers, fishers, artisans. This was not a wealthy empire with massive academies and golden perches. This was a network stitched together by trust and improvisation. They used what they had: bark-bone birds and a staggering amount of patience. You walk further into the training area and spot a board nailed to a tree. On it are tiny drawings, symbols for sun rain, trade, birth, danger. These were early pictograms used to teach children the meanings behind the messages they might receive. It wasn't literacy per se, it was legibility. Knowing the symbols was enough to understand the risk, the request, the celebration. Suddenly, a flutter of wings above. A bird returns. One of the elders cups it carefully and unties the scroll. He reads it, nods once, then raises a fist. Everyone cheers. Even in the middle of a jungle, news can travel faster than feet ever could. And as the training resumes, whistles, click songs, you realize you're not in a forest anymore. You're in an information hub, a living web of memory and instinct. And the routers, they have feathers. You squat on a smooth stone, tracing your finger along a thin strip of palm bark. It's brittle and fibrous like dried seaweed, but the etchings on it are surprisingly complex. Not letters, not exactly, but lines sharp-slanted, sometimes coiled along with tiny indentations and deliberate groupings. It's a message, but not one you'd read aloud. Next to you, an elder shows you how to fold it properly 3 times, never 4. 4 folds, he murmurs, means death. You laugh nervously, but he doesn't. Superstition. Probably, but in a system this delicate, you don't take chances. He binds the tiny scroll with a reed fiber, then adds a final flourish, a knot. It's not just for securing the scroll, it's coded. The number of loops, the direction of the twist, even whether the ends are tucked or left frayed, it all means something. Historians still argue whether these knots functioned like early encryption or were simply decorative markers to differentiate messages. Some claim entire dialects of knot language evolved each island region with its own syntax. Others say that's just romanticism layered onto old string. Either way, you now understand this was never just about the bird. The message mattered, and the medium had to survive everything: rain, sweat, wind, talons, claws. You reach for another scroll. This one's bark is darker, more tightly wound. The symbol, carved into its face, a wave, maybe a river, tells you it's a water-related message. The knot, a double loop left frayed. You don't know exactly what it says, but someone will. Someone downstream. You think of the modern text message sent seen, replied in seconds. But here, each word was deliberate. Messages weren't dashed off in a moment of emotion. They were composed with time, folded with care, and carried on the back of a living creature. It's the slowest kind of speed. And yet, there's something poetic about it. A boy beside you is preparing a bird for flight. His scroll is tied, but he isn't rushing. First, he checks the weather, not with an app, but by sniffing the wind, tasting the humidity on his lips. Then he smears a little coconut oil on the bird's legs, not for scent this time, but to help the fiber slide loose easily when the bird lands. Fringe enthusiasts have theories about this too. Some believe that different oils were used to signal message priority. Coconut oil for peacetime talk, clove oil for trade, snake oil, yes, literally, for danger. The bird didn't understand the meaning, but the handler on the other side would. One sniff, and they'd know if the news was good or grim. You watch as the boy whispers to the bird. No chant, just a single name, Dawan. Maybe the name of a person, or a place, or perhaps a memory only the bird knows. Then the boy lifts his hand, and the bird departs, not with a dramatic burst, but a steady climb, like it knows the way already. You walk to a different post, this one for receiving birds. An elder stands with a carved stick in hand, topped with a piece of dried banana leaf. He waves it gently, making a soft, crinkling noise. A bird circles overhead. Sometimes, the elder says, without turning, they get confused in storms. But the sound reminds them where to land. It's not unlike calling a dog with a squeaky toy, simple, effective, and entirely based on trust. Nearby, a woman tends to a small shelf of scrolls, each tagged with a colored bead. Green for arrived, red for missing, blue for sent today. She doesn't speak, just sorts them, then gently lays a new scroll on the shelf. You notice she's wearing a necklace of tiny knots. Not decorative, each knot represents a message she's received, a personal archive worn on her collarbone. And somewhere in the trees above, you hear the flap of wings and wonder. What message is flying now? A birth, a death, a wedding, a warning. Because when birds carried your words, you had to choose them carefully. There were no deletes, no edits, no follow-ups, just one chance, tied with fiber, folded in bark, and whispered into the air. You're sitting in a circle now, cross-legged on woven mats that smell faintly of smoked bamboo. The sun has dipped behind the tree line, and a bluish twilight begins to pool between the trunks. Fireflies emerge blinking in lazy intervals, while a nearby clay brazier sends up soft spirals of sandalwood smoke. A bird cage sits in the middle, but this is no casual gathering. This is ritual. The bird inside, sleek and gray eyes sharp as obsidian, is not new to this. It stands perfectly still, feathers, smoothed chest rising with slow, deliberate breath. The villagers sit silently around it, heads bowed slightly, like they're in the presence of something more than just feathers and hollow bones. This is the ritual of trust. The village elder begins to chant. Not loudly, just enough to stir the smoke and tilt the energy of the clearing. It's a melodic loop punctuated by gentle claps and the occasional shake of a dried seed rattle. You watch the bird. It doesn't move. Then someone steps forward with a bowl. Inside, jasmine petals, drops of coconut milk, and bits of burned clove. They anoint the bird's head wings and back, not for cleansing, for blessing. Because sending a message in ancient Indonesia wasn't just about logistics. It was spiritual. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were truly believed to give birds supernatural guidance, or if they simply helped handlers feel emotionally assured before sending something irreplaceable into the wild. Either way, it worked. Reassurance is its own kind of magic. The elder then attaches the scroll. This one is folded palm bark, but bound with red bark fiber, meaning urgent. The knots, 3 tight, spiraling counterclockwise. You don't know what the message says, but it's clear it matters. The bird is lifted skyward with both hands. A breath is held, then released. The bird takes off, not panicked, not hesitant, but steady, purposeful, and the whole group leans back like a burden just flew out of their lungs. In the silence that follows, someone tells you the story of the bird of sorrow, a legendary pigeon trained to fly between two star-crossed lovers on different islands. For months, it carried scrolls of longing back and forth, never missing a day. Then, one morning, it returned without a message. Just a black ribbon tied to its leg. The girl had died. The bird never flew again, romanticized certainly. But the people around you don't treat it like fiction. They speak of it the way you might talk about a family heirloom or a vanished friend. Not just with respect, but with ache. And then a fringe theory enters the conversation. Someone claims that certain birds were bred specifically for emotional intelligence. Not in the Western scientific sense, but with the idea that birds could feel when a message was too heavy. That some birds refused to fly with scrolls that contained bad omens. Laughable, perhaps. But then you remember how many animals in modern times sense earthquakes before they happen, or flee fires before smoke is visible. Maybe they weren't wrong, just early. A dog barks in the distance. One of the boys around the fire perks up. He points. Another bird is incoming, gliding low over the treetops, silent and sure. It swoops down, perches on the edge of a post, and waits. The message is untied. Another elder opens it carefully and nods. "He's coming," she says. That's all. But it's enough. Smiles break out. Someone laughs. The mood softens. You've just witnessed a communication system that is not only effective, but emotional. Every bird is a gamble. Every message a prayer, and every return a small miracle. You lean back, watching the moon rise through the branches. The birds are roosting now, puffed up like commas in the trees. And somewhere in the dark, another scroll is being tied. You awaken the next morning to the steady clink of stone pestles and the low murmur of preparation. The village is alive with a different kind of tension, not fear, but urgency. Something has happened. A young man jogs into the clearing barefoot, his tunic damp with dew. In his hand, a scroll wrapped in dark bark fiber. He thrusts it toward the elders. They read it quickly, eyes scanning with sharp focus. Then a simple nod. "Time to send word," someone says. Not panic, just precision. Now you see the birds differently. Not just trained couriers, but first responders. News doesn't spread here by voice, not when the jungle muffles sound and the rivers twist unpredictably. But birds cut through. One elder selects a pigeon with a bright red band on its leg. "He flies east," she says before preparing the message. You lean in, curious. This time, the scroll is shorter, but it's bound with a compound knot you haven't seen before, tight and slightly asymmetrical. This isn't just a message, it's a signal. The bird is released into the morning haze, and within seconds, it's gone. Historians still debate just how far these ancient bird networks reached. Some argue they were purely local, village to village. Others insist birds flew between kingdoms across island chains, even over open water. Skeptical, sure. But when you live in an archipelago like Indonesia, where travel by land is limited and boat journeys or long flight begins to look like the best option. In some regions, it wasn't warriors that people feared most. It was messengers. A well-timed scroll could call allies warn of ambushes or expose betrayal before it hatched. There are records, though vague, of birds arriving mere hours before a surprise attack, tipping the balance of power. And then there's the infamous legend of the bloodbird. They say it was sent to warn a village of a midnight raid. But it arrived late, wounded, bleeding from a cut in its side. The message was recovered, but the bird died in the elder's hands. By then, it was too late. Half the village was destroyed. To this day, some tribes burn a bit of red bark at dawn, not as incense, but as apology. You're led now to a small shrine tucked near a bend in the river. Here, the villagers pay tribute to fallen messengers. Feathers are strung along a line, fluttering gently in the wind. A few scrolls, water-damaged and faded, hang as offerings. One is blank, intentionally, for the message never sent a boy explains. There's something haunting about it. You think of all the modern emails and texts that go unread, ignored, or deleted. But here, one missed message could change a generation. Back in the clearing, they prepare another bird. This one's different, slightly larger, with a narrower beak. You ask, and the handler explains he's a boundary crosser, meaning he doesn't just fly village to village. He flies between territories. Trained to recognize drum beats instead of landmarks, these birds were rare. They responded not to scent or sight, but to sound. Along the route, specific percussion patterns played on hollowed-out logs acted like beacons. One beat for safe harbor, two quick taps for danger, a rolling rhythm for homecoming. Fringe historians go further. They claim that some birds could distinguish drum dialects, identifying not just the sound, but the speaker. Absurd, maybe. But you've already seen birds pause mid-flight when hearing a familiar song. Who's to say they didn't learn to listen? A handler strikes a drum. Once, twice. The bird's head tilts. The sound carries out over the valley like a heartbeat. You wait. The bird leaps skyward. As it fades into the distance, you realize something. No matter how advanced the training, every message still relies on the unknown. Weather, predators, confusion. No guarantees. And yet, they keep sending. Because in this world, communication is survival. Later that evening, beneath the lantern glow of firefly jars, you hear a different kind of tale, one that brings a hush over the gathering. The villagers sit in a crescent, sipping warm ginger tea and listening to the oldest woman in the village tell the story of the lost dove. It begins with a storm, a great one, they say, monsoon rains that tore trees from soil and filled the rivers with black foam. A chieftain's daughter had fallen ill, and only a specific herb found many valleys away could save her. But there was no time to send a runner. So the fastest bird was summoned. The scroll was tied, the oil was dabbed, a chant whispered, and the dove flew. But the bird never returned. The girl died. The storm passed. And when the skies cleared, the village began to whisper, had the bird failed, or had someone intercepted it? Historians still argue whether this was just folklore or a stylized retelling of a political betrayal. Some versions claim the bird was captured by a rival clan, and the message burned proof that even birds could be pawns in power plays. Others say it got lost in the winds, that no one was to blame. But the myth grew anyway. From then on, if a bird didn't return, it wasn't called missing, it was said to have joined the wind. You sip your tea slowly, letting that phrase settle. There's something eerily beautiful about it. These people didn't just use birds, they mourned them, trusted them, gave them stories. In fact, across the islands there are countless variations of this tale. Some speak of birds that vanished and came back years later with messages still attached, waterlogged, unreadable, but intact. Others tell of birds that refused to fly until their sender made peace with someone or offered a prayer to the sea. Fringe theories multiply, of course. Some researchers believe these stories were subtle ways of recording failed diplomatic missions turned into parables to avoid blame. A kind of oral encryption. No one betrayed anyone. The bird just never came home. But to the villagers, these weren't just lessons, they were warnings. You rise and walk toward a small alcove built into the hillside. There carved into the rock is an image of a bird mid-flight, its wings extended fully, carrying a scroll tied with 3 loops. Beneath it, a line of script in Old Sundanese, worn but legible. A local helps you read it aloud. The message matters, but so does the journey. It's quiet after that. The children fall asleep first, bundled in banana fiber blankets. The birds are silent too, roosting in their cages, heads tucked beneath wings. One old man stirs a fire back to life and speaks without turning to you. Sometimes he says a message is never meant to arrive, only to be sent. You think about that as you lie down beneath the woven roof. How strange it must have been to live in a world where communication was sacred, where sending words into the wind wasn't just a method, it was an act of faith. And tomorrow at dawn, more scrolls will be tied, because not every bird returns, but every message deserves a chance. Dawn stretches lazily across the treetops as mist curls between trunks and vines. You're already awake, sitting beside a shallow earthen lamp filled with coconut oil. Its flame flickers weakly, but not because it's failing, it's intentional. Today, they're preparing for a night flight. You'd assumed birds only traveled by day. But in this village, nestled deep within the interior of Kalimantan, some birds are trained for darkness. They fly by starlight, or more commonly by the dim glint of carefully placed coconut oil lamps, little floating lanterns nestled along the treetops like breadcrumbs for feathered couriers. You look up. High above, a platform woven from thick branches holds 3 birds in covered cages. A handler named Suri, draped in a shawl of woven reeds, is applying a paste to their legs. When asked, she smiles lemongrass and lime oil for the scent. So they find their way home. She points into the jungle. We place lamps along the route, 1 every tree length. That way they know the path. Historians still argue whether these nighttime routes were reliable or more symbolic. Some sources mention elaborate flight plans using moonlight and reflective leaves to guide birds. Others are skeptical. Birds can't read lanterns, they scoff. But you're here. You see it, and you believe. You accompany Suri and 2 others as they quietly light the lamps, moving like shadows through the bush. Each flame is tiny but distinct, low to the eye, high enough for a gliding bird to spot. There's no trail of smoke, no torch waving, just warmth, light, and scent. Once the route is ready, the birds are unwrapped. Each has a scroll already tied snug under a wing. Their cages are lifted to a perch, and the handlers pause, not just for breath, but to listen. It's then that you notice the air is filled with low humming, soft, rhythmic, constant. A lullaby, but slower. It's for the birds. Fringe scholars have long debated the role of sound in these nocturnal flights. Some claim the birds were trained to follow specific hums, the way modern systems track radio frequencies. Others believe it simply soothed them, keeping panic at bay as they navigated a moonlit jungle. Suri places 1 hand gently over a bird's heart. It remembers, she says. And with no more fanfare than a breath, the bird is released. It doesn't flap wildly. It glides, 1 swift arc into the dark, toward the 2nd lamp, then the 3rd. Then it's gone. You squint into the black, amazed. Of course, not all birds make it back. A night predator, a sudden wind, a misjudged branch. But the villagers don't stop sending them, because sometimes night is the only safe time to communicate. When enemies rest, when storms are quiet, when words need to pass unseen. Later that evening, a bird returns, feathers damp from low clouds, scroll slightly frayed. but it's intact. The message is short. Suri reads it aloud. Supplies received. No need for worry. The mood lifts, and you understand the real purpose of these night flights. It isn't just secrecy or speed, it's reassurance. It's knowing that while the world sleeps, someone still watches the skies. Morning in the island market is never quiet. You're standing in the middle of a swirling sea of sound laughter, bargaining, clinking pots, and above it all, the ceaseless chatter of birds. Not wild ones, mind you. These birds are merchandise. The market stretches under palm leaf canopies and crooked woven stalls. Traders hawk baskets of turmeric ropes of dried fish, carved bone tools, and cages. Dozens of cages, some tall, some wide, all filled with feathers. But these aren't pets. You follow the crowd to a corner stall where two men are bartering loudly. One holds a sleek white bird with glossy feathers and a beaded ankle strap. The other gestures toward a sack of rice. A deal is struck. The bird is handed over gently, like a sacred text. In ancient Indonesian markets like this, birds were currency, but not in the way you'd think. They weren't sold for beauty or song. They were traded based on memory. A bird that knew the route to 3 villages useful. One that had delivered messages through 2 monsoons and always returned priceless. Historians still argue whether birds were marked with coated leg bands or simply remembered by story. Some believe color-coded threads or tiny wood beads denoted their roots and training. Others claim bird traders used complex oral mnemonics to track each bird's history. No paperwork, no ledgers, just memory passed hand to hand. You approach an older woman seated beside a trio of cages. She watches you with hawk eyes and doesn't speak until you kneel. Then she opens one cage and lets you peek inside. The bird is calm, alert. A faint blue stain marks its breast feathers. She flies over water, the woman says softly. No fear of the sea. Indeed, many of these birds are trained to fly not just between forests, but across channels between islands. From Java to Bali, Sulawesi to Flores. They follow wind currents, cloud shapes, and the smell of fish smoke on the breeze. There's a name for these elite birds, penyebrang langit, sky crossers. Fringe theories say their training involved floating rafts spaced along open water, where handlers lit torches and offered food. Some even speculate birds were conditioned to fly toward certain star constellations, a sort of celestial compass encoded through repetition. You wander further and find a shaded stall with carved wooden perches. Here, traders are quietly exchanging birds bred in captivity. You watch a man inspect one checking wing strength, clarity of eye calmness under handling. No flinch, he mutters approvingly. Good message, bird. A younger handler interrupts, holding up a scroll. What about him, he asks. The older man squints. Too twitchy. He'll panic in wind. You realize this isn't a place to buy birds, it's a place to buy certainty. These traders aren't just breeders. They're logisticians, analysts, whisperers of wind and wings. And like any industry, there are scams. A boy sidles up with a flashy green parrot, boasting it once flew from Borneo to Timor in a single day. The traders laugh. Then, why is it still here, someone snorts. But beyond the laughter, there's deep respect. Here, birds are not toys. They are lifelines, histories, sometimes even heirs. In one corner, you spot a shrine, small, half-hidden. Inside, a carved wooden dove rests beneath a string of dried petals and a bowl of water. A tribute, perhaps, to a bird that never came home. You sit for a moment and let the noise of the market swirl around you. This is the hidden machinery behind ancient communication. Not scrolls, not chance, not even training. Trust. That's the real currency. Because when you tie a message to a bird's leg and let it vanish into the sky, you're doing more than sending words. You're releasing hope. You're standing now on a jagged cliff, the sea far below slapping rhythmically against the rocks. The sky above is streaked with lazy cirrus clouds, and the wind is strong, steady, not wild, but enough to lift a bird without effort. Beside you, a man named Rama lifts his arm. On it perches a bird, unlike the others you've seen. Sleeker, longer wings. Its chest feathers are mottled in streaks of gray and white, the color of sea foam and ash. She knows the route to Bali, Rama says with a touch of pride. The island shimmers faintly on the horizon, 50 kilometers away, give or take. You squint. There's no way you think. That's too far. But Rama's bird doesn't seem concerned. A scroll is tied to her leg. Not large, just a narrow reed tube sealed with beeswax to protect the palm bark inside. You wonder what it says? A greeting, a warning, a wedding invitation, you'll never know. He releases her with a breath. She doesn't flap madly or hesitate. She leaps forward, catches a gust, and vanishes into the blue. It's almost absurd, this idea that a bird could make it across open ocean without landmarks. But it wasn't unheard of. Historians still debate the frequency of these long-distance flights. Some claim inter-island messaging was rare and reserved only for moments of crisis or trade negotiations. Others argue it was more common than we realize that birds, not boats, were the first to stitch the islands of Indonesia together into something like a nation. But how did they navigate? One theory is wind literacy. Birds raised near the shore learned to read wind direction the same way humans read the sun. Another theory points to scent trails villages on opposing coasts might burn clove and nutmeg at dawn, letting the wind carry a recognizable trace far out to sea. A fringe idea even posits that birds were trained to follow smoke plumes from island volcanoes, a terrifying yet oddly plausible thought, considering how many major settlements sat near active calderas. Rama tells you a story. Many years ago, a fisherman was lost in a storm. His family sent a bird after him, not to find him, but to carry a message. Come home. All is forgiven. The bird vanished into the cyclone. A week later, the fisherman washed ashore. Alive. He had no memory of the message. But in his boat's wreckage, tucked beneath a broken oar, they found a torn strip of reed, sealed with beeswax. Coincidence, perhaps. But to Rama, that bird wasn't just a courier. It was a compass, one that always pointed to hope. You walk along the cliff path and spot another handler preparing a launch. This one's more complex. There are two birds. One will fly halfway, then return while the other continues on. A relay. You hadn't realized they shared routes like that, but it makes sense. A single bird might not survive the full journey. But two. That's a safer bet. Fringe historians claim there were even bird outposts, platforms on remote islets, where trained handlers kept water grain and backup birds like medieval post offices on stilts. You reach a small shrine carved into the cliff wall. It's nothing grand, just a hollowed recess with a feather, a shell, and a bundle of knotted thread. You don't ask what the message said. The silence around it is reverent enough. And now, as the sun dips lower, another bird returns. This one drops down quickly, as if tired. The handler catches it, checks the scroll, and smiles. She made it, he whispers. The message arrived. And for a moment, the crashing waves, the high wind, the vast, empty stretch of ocean all seem less intimidating. Because in this place, above sea and jungle, One truth carries a bird in flight is never just a bird. It's a thread connecting hearts across impossible distances. You're back inland now, standing beneath the sloping thatch roof of a narrow bamboo hut that smells of incense and dried banana leaves. It's quieter here, no bustling markets or crashing waves, just the murmur of conversation and the low cooing of birds. But what catches your attention isn't the birds, it's the singing. A young woman sits cross-legged near the window, a woven mat across her knees. On it lies a juvenile bird, small, alert, and still fluffed from the nest. She's not feeding it. She's singing to it, a soft melody rising and falling like a lullaby. You listen closer. It's not just a tune. It's a pattern repeating in cycles of 3 with occasional taps against the mat. And the bird, it's watching, not blinking, not moving. You lean over and whisper, "Is this part of the training?" She nods without stopping her song. Historians still debate how deep the role of sound went in bird training. Some insist songs were used only for comfort, while others claim that these melodies acted like auditory maps, anchoring flight routes in a bird's memory through rhythm. The more fringe interpretations that certain families passed down melodic codes, like surnames, each line of bird handlers owning a unique song that only their birds would follow. Here, the belief is simpler. The bird must know your voice, the woman says when she finally pauses. So when it's lost, it will come back to your sound. Nearby, another handler is doing something entirely different. He's rubbing a mix of crushed turmeric lemongrass and pandan leaf into the bird's wing joints. Smell is memory, he says. The wind is full of it. Each region seems to favor its own method. In the highlands, birds were trained with chant. In coastal villages, with smoke and food. But in this forest valley, it's song and scent, soft tools for carving invisible trails into the air. You try whistling one of the simple melodies you've just heard. The young bird twitches. It remembers. You're shown a chart scratched into a bark board, more art than science. Arrows point between abstract shapes, each one labeled not with numbers, but with colors, oils, and tones. One path is labeled Clove Sweet High Song. Another, Sour Bitter Drum Tap. It's a flat map, but not one any airplane could follow. Instead, this is a sensory landscape, one built on repetition, familiarity, and patience. You ask how long it takes to train a single bird. The answer, 6 moons if the bird is sharp, a full year if it's stubborn. But once trained, it rarely forgets. And the remarkable part, these birds didn't just memorize destinations. They bonded. Handlers describe a phenomenon where birds hesitate to leave if their sender is sick or grieving. They'll perch nearby even with the scroll tied and route prepared. Some say the birds know. Others say it's just coincidence. Either way, the connection is real. Later that evening, you watch a farewell ceremony. A young man is sending his first trained bird on a message to his sister in a neighboring valley. He kneels beside it, humming softly. His mother ties the scroll with trembling fingers. The entire family watches in silence. Then the bird is released. No panic, no flutter, just trust. It glides into the darkening sky, following a trail of memory made not from roads or walls, but from scent, song, and silence. And in that moment, you realize these birds weren't just trained. They were raised. Part of the family, carriers of words, and keepers of something more delicate connection. The fire crackles low beside you, casting dancing shadows on the clay wall. The stars above are crisp and crowded like someone spilled a basket of salt across black velvet. Tonight, you're being told a story that doesn't show up in any textbook. It's the story of the Shadow Feathers Guild. The old man who tells it speaks slowly, occasionally sipping from a gourd of fermented rice drink. Not all birds flew for villages, he begins. Some flew for kings. You lean forward. According to the tale, there once existed a secretive network of elite bird handlers, men and women chosen not by lineage or fame, but by silence. They operated between palaces, temples, and courts, delivering messages too volatile for runners and too sacred for public ears. They weren't many, the man says, no more than 20 at any time, but they were worth 100 scribes. These handlers trained birds not just to carry messages, but to vanish to fly under moonlight, cross enemy borders, and land in courtyards without so much as a flutter. Historians still argue whether this guild truly existed. There are no official records, no statues, just whispers embedded in local folklore and a few carved symbols: a bird with no eyes, a scroll without writing found on ancient palace stones. But what lends the story weight is its consistency. Across several islands, Java, Lombok, Sulawesi, the same name appears: Bayangan, Bulu shadow feather. The same myths echo a bird that flew across battlefields undetected, a handler who disappeared after a failed delivery, a king who trusted only one bird with his dying words. Fringe historians believe these operatives used not just physical cues, but illusion, that they stained their birds with dark dye so they would vanish into the night sky, that their messages were encoded in burnt symbols legible only when warmed above fire. You ask how they avoided interception. The old man smiles. They trained the birds to change course when they heard a false call, or to fake an injury and drop to the ground. And some would fly in pairs. One carried the real message. The other was a decoy. You blink. Of course, he adds, this was all long ago. But then he reaches into a satchel and pulls out a tiny, dusty ankle ring. Woven from hair-thin bark fibers, it carries a symbol, a circle broken by 3 feather marks. You'll find no history book with this, he says. But she flew for the last queen of Majapahit. Whether you believe him or not, it doesn't matter. The fire is warm, the night is deep, and the stars don't care if stories are proven or just passed down. Still, as you walk back to your mat, you can't help but wonder. If birds were trusted with secrets that shaped kingdoms, what might still be buried in some hollow log or lost under the roots of a banyan tree, and how many messages never reach their kings? How many truths are still flying? The next morning arrives humid and tense. The clouds hang low and the birds seem unusually restless. You're standing beside the village watchtower, a modest wooden platform with a wide view of the treetops, and you notice something odd. A group of handlers gathered, not to send a bird, but to intercept one. A scout has reported a courier bird flying off course, arriving from a direction no allied village lies in. Its leg bears a scroll, but it's not tied the usual way. The bird is gently caught and the message examined. It's a scroll, all right. Palm bark, knotted, but the knot is wrong, backwards looped with reed instead of bark. A subtle sign, but to these villagers it screams suspicious. The scroll is opened. It reads like peace, courteous, even familiar. But the elders murmur. Too familiar, someone says. They used her name, but she died last season. You feel the chill creep up your spine. Historians still argue over the prevalence of intercepted birds and faked messages. In some accounts, rival territories employed bird catchers' handlers trained to lure foreign birds off course using decoy songs or bait scents. Some would capture birds and reroute them with false information. Others would release 2 birds at once, each bearing a different message, hoping one would arrive first and shape the outcome. Fringe accounts speak of a practice called ghost roding a ploy, where a trained bird was intentionally released with a fake scroll designed to stir confusion, force a negotiation, or spark a defensive response. These tactics weren't just strategy. They were psychological warfare with feathers. The woman next to you recalls one such tale. A message was sent to a coastal village announcing a birth. Joyous news. Preparations were made for a celebration. But when the envoys arrived days later, they came not with gifts, but with fire. The bird had lied, or rather the message had. The baby had died at birth. The true scroll never arrived, the one that did a forgery. From then on, that village burned its messages before reading them, trusting only what was remembered, not written. You glance at the scroll again. It has been placed into a small clay pot along with a pinch of ash and dried clove. A fire is lit. Slowly, the scroll curls and blackens. Let smoke carry the lie away, says the elder who lit it. But the bird is not blamed. She is fed, washed, her leg unbound. Because in this culture, the bird is not the traitor. It's the words that betray. Later, you see a child being taught how to tie a decoy knot. He practices with string and folded bark, mimicking the slip-twist loop that marks an urgent deception. You realize this isn't just defense. It's literacy of another kind taught not in books, but in bark and braid. And while modern warfare may be digital, now this old system had its own encryption. One mistake in a knot, one extra twist, one symbol used out of season, and the whole message would unravel. As you leave the tower and walk back toward the bird enclosures, a thought lingers. It wasn't just the birds that were trained. It was the people, too, trained to listen, to doubt, to read the air, the wing, the weave of fiber. Because in a world of flying words, survival meant knowing which ones were real. The jungle doesn't sleep, but it does change. At night it murmurs. During storms it howls. But now, in the age of conquest, it echoes. Not with bird calls, but with something else cracks. You're standing near a ruined outpost, its stone foundation now overrun with moss and creeping vines. The birds are gone. The cages have rotted, but scorched marks remain, soot-blackened walls, fractured urns, fragments of broken scroll tubes. This is what happens when feathers give way to fire. The arrival of colonial forces in the Indonesian archipelago brought more than trade and religion. It brought noise, gunpowder signal flares, and eventually telegraph wire. Birds, once revered as messengers, began to seem outdated, slow, vulnerable. You're shown an artifact, a thick, rusted wire looped around a wooden pole. Nearby sits a boxy device that once clicked out messages in Morse. It looks alien here, cold mechanical, and yet it represents a shift. One handler, long since gone, carved into the stone near the outpost. The birds flew before the wires sang. Historians still argue whether bird networks collapsed due to colonial pressure or simply faded as newer technologies emerged. Some say it was practical. Others that it was intentional, that authorities saw the unregulated movement of information via birds as a threat to their control. Fringe theories go further. They claim some resistance groups continued using birds well into the 20th century, hiding scrolls in feathers dyed to match wild flocks, training couriers in secret caves, using rhythms in birdsong as covert signals. Supposedly, one bird even carried a message that sparked a key ambush during the early struggle for independence. But such stories are hard to verify. The wires spread, roads carved through hills, radios buzzed, and the sky, once full of whispers, grew quieter. You walk through a patch of cleared jungle where a colonial signal tower once stood. Now it's just rusted beams and buried concrete. But in a nearby tree, you notice something strange. A nest, inside twigs, leaves, and a strip of old bark fiber folded, tied. The message is unreadable. Mold has eaten the ink. But someone or something placed it there. A relic, a tribute. You don't know. Later, you're shown a burial site, not for humans, but for birds. Tiny mounds marked with etched stones. These flew before the fire, says your guide. The elders here still light incense for the old ways. Not because they reject the modern world, but because they remember one where trust flew winged and wordless. In a small shrine nearby, there's a faded mural. A handler stands between two worlds, on one side birds and scrolls, on the other wires and explosions. Between them, a bridge of feathers turn into smoke. You ask the old woman tending the shrine if she misses the birds. She smiles. The birds never left, only the messages did, and in that sentence everything is quiet again. Because while history marches forward, not every message has to be shouted. Some still fly. You return to the same village where your journey began. The birds still coo in their cages. Children still hum the old songs. The air carries that familiar blend of wood smoke, damp leaves, and something else possibility. You're sitting with a boy no older than 8. His hands are gentle as he ties a reed strip to the leg of a young bird. He's not rushing. He's careful, his fingers moving like he's repeating something sacred. What does it say, you ask softly. He shrugs. Nothing important, he says. Just hello. And somehow, that feels more powerful than any coded war message. The bird is released. It doesn't hesitate. It cuts through the morning mist with precision, arcing over the treetops like it's been doing this for centuries. Because it has. In one form or another, it has. Historians may never agree on how extensive these bird-based systems really were. Some believe they were isolated pockets of ingenuity. Others believe they were part of a massive, decentralized network, a feathered proto-internet long before cables ever touched soil. But the elders here, they don't care about debates. To them, it's not history. It's memory, practice, continuity. You ask one of them, a woman with silver hair and ink-stained fingers, if she still sends birds. Sometimes she says, smiling, when words feel too small for the phone, she hands you a strip of palm bark and a sharpened twig. Write something. Anything. You do. She folds it, knots it, and ties it to a bird, already watching you like it knows this is your first time. You lift your hand. You hesitate. The bird tilts its head. You exhale. And you let go. It takes flight. Straight, steady, unbothered by your nervousness. And in that moment, you feel something you hadn't expected. Not pride, not awe. Relief, because you've just sent a message the old way. With patience, with presence, with hope. You watch it vanish over the ridge. And even though you may never see it again, you don't feel empty. You feel connected. And now, as we settle in for the night, let the sound of wings fade into silence. Let the jungle grow still once more. The fires have burned low. The scrolls have all been tied and sent. The birds are roosting their work done for the day. You're not sending messages anymore. You're resting, letting go. Imagine yourself back under that thatched roof wrapped in linen, the breeze moving gently through woven walls. The scent of lemongrass, sweet smoke, and warm feathers lingers in the air. You hear a faint cooing above a soft reminder that not everything needs to be rushed. Not every thought needs to be typed. Some things still deserve to fly slowly, carried with care. Let your breath slow to match the rhythm of a gliding bird. Inhale and drift. Exhale and release. All the messages have been sent. All the questions for now can wait. There's no rush, no signal to chase, just stillness, just the soft hum of the night. Let your body grow heavy against the mat. Let your eyes close gently. Let the weight of ancient stories pull you deeper. And as you float toward sleep, know this. Somewhere high above the trees, a bird is still flying, carrying a message no one else could send toward a place only it remembers. It will get there. You already have. End of script. Sweet dreams.